Good.
Okay, we're live. You're here with Revhillmanhawk, Adam Hall. I'm with Pastor Deane Proctor. He's out of Southern Ontario. He's actually an old friend. I met him back in, I think it was, no, I think it was 2006, 2007,
Hmm.
where he was a pastor in the town next to me in small town Southern Ontario. And Deane's been a blessing in my life in many ways, in a lot of ways, just helping me just get the pastoral ministry thing going, and he's been a big blessing and encouragement to my life. So I want to thank Deane for coming, and as well thank him for being as vulnerable as that he will have to be in sharing about mental illness. And I'll let Deane introduce himself. So Deane, tell us something about yourself that would be exciting for everyone to know.
Well, exciting. So I'm in Brantford, Ontario, and Brantford is the home of course, Wayne Gretzky. And so we've got like everything in town is named after Wayne Gretzky, roads, arenas, and his dad, Walter, shows up at every community event going. So just a wonderful, wonderful guy. You can't go into a restaurant without Walter stopping by your table and making sure everybody's doing okay. So it's fun being in Brantford. I pastor Queensway Baptist Church, and we came here to Brantford in 2009. My wife and our two daughters, and it has been a really, really wonderful move and wonderful time over the last almost 6 years that we've been in Brantford.
Okay, great. And yeah, and you're in a lovely CBOQ church just like me.
Yes.
So yeah, and you also have a podcast, which is kind of what spurred this discussion that we have. It's called Mind Matters, and you do it with a chap from your church, Scott Martin. Do you want to tell us a bit about that and how we can find you on the internet?
Yeah, the podcast was actually Scott's idea. He was doing one with another friend of his that was for movie reviews, and he's found that to be, you know, the prep that you have to do for it, and the planning and the post production and all that was something that was very therapeutic for Scott. And then he took it one step further, and because of his own challenges with mental illness, and then knowing mine, which we'll talk about shortly, he said, hey, would you be interested in doing a podcast on that topic, specifically on mental illness and Christianity, mental illness and the church? And so we've been doing that for, I'm not even sure. I think we've got 11 or 12 episodes. They're half-hour episodes, and we try and do one every 2 weeks. And a variety of topics and a variety of different focuses. And yeah, you can find us via iTunes. I think for 1 week we were listed under the new and notable category, and then we disappeared again. So you really have to search for us, and you can find us listed there. It's free to subscribe, and really appreciate it if you did. And if you happen to go to queensway.org, which is our church webpage, you can find episodes of the podcast linked from our church homepage.
Okay, great. Now, I think every minister I've met to has had some sort, I've ran into that I know well has had, and I myself has had some sort of mental breakdown, anxiety, depression. And I know that you share this on your podcast, but I just want to know if you could share with everybody a short testimony about your struggle with mental illness.
Sure. I usually start by working backwards from diagnosis. The diagnosis was in September of 2008, and I was in a particularly difficult place and very frustrated, very short-tempered, very low energy, sleep patterns were off, migraine, headaches, appetite was off, and I really just didn't know enough about mental illness to know what I was really facing, and ended up going to my family doctor, who there's two different tests or assessment tools that doctors will use. One has, I think, 7 questions, and one has 9 questions, and they're the typical questions. uh, your sleep patterns, your appetite, your loss of interest in things that were previously interesting to you. Do you deal with guilt issues? And one of them is are you suicidal? And I had all of the symptoms except suicidal. And I always kind of joke that I wasn't suicidal because the issue was everybody else's problem. And why would I take my own life when you're a jerk? So that was my that was my attitude. And so the doctor said, "Yeah, you have major depression." And so I was given some medication at that point that, as I describe it, took me from looking through the peephole of a door, where you can just see what's in front of you and you're hyper-focused on what's in front of you. I went widescreen, and suddenly I had perspective again, and I could be objective about some of the things I was facing. And where I was desperate, and I use that word intentionally, I was desperate to change churches because it was just such a frustrating place where I was. Turns out the problem was me. And once I got back on the ball, suddenly my church and the people around me were a lot easier to deal with. Funny thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so did the church do anything to contribute to that, or you're just completely saying it was all you?
You already indicated the caring profession. It's hard on people that are in the caring profession. I don't care if that's clergy, social workers, nurses, doctors, anybody that's in a caring profession where you're called on to put out and put out and put out, inevitably runs into some kind of trouble, major or minor. And for me, it was major. And once as I described it, went widescreen, I had to think about, when was the last time I felt this good? When is the last time I felt, if this is normal, when was the last time I felt like this? And I estimated it to be, so I was 40 when I was diagnosed. I estimated that I had been feeling better. I had been feeling like that since grade 8.
Wow.
That's when I estimated, when was the last time I was feeling, if this is normal, when was the last time I felt this? And it was about grade 8 for me. And so something happened around that time, and I just didn't know enough. But it explains a lot of some of the choices that I made in my life, coping poorly, self-medicating, and that type of thing through my life before I became a Christian at age 25.
Mm-hmm. So, as a Christian now, and as you encounter people that might have panic attacks, depression, all sorts of mental disorders, what kind of first biblical advice could you give them, and then second, maybe just common sense advice that maybe not be relevant or they might not have heard of before?
Yeah. One of the things I found in our communities, in our society, mental illness has a lot of stigma attached to it, and it's even worse in the Christian community.
Mm-hmm.
We are, and you've heard this quote, I'm sure, lots of times, we're the only army that shoots its own wounded. and I certainly found that to be true. And so rather than feeling like people were meeting me, where I was being dragged to where I should be. And so I would hear too often, well, have you prayed about it? Have you sought the scriptures? What's the unconfessed sin in your life that has manifested itself as major depression? And none of those things were helpful. None of those things were pastoral. They were almost like being victimized all over again, as if it was my fault because I wasn't holy enough. The truth is, of course, nobody's holy enough. We're all sinners. And whereas I believe that I can sin because of my sickness, because I'm not thinking properly, I can sin because of my sickness, but I'm not as quick to say that all sickness is a result of sin.
Mm-hmm.
So I would first encourage people that are struggling with it, first of all, to find someone that you can talk to who's not going to give you solutions right off the bat, who's not going to tell you what you should do or diagnose what's wrong with you as a layperson. Go to your family doctor first. Find out what's going on, and yes, as the old, I think it's a Jewish proverb, pray for help but row for shore at the same time. By all means be seeking the Lord, but don't forget that the Lord has given the brains to the people that created the medicine that I take currently.
And this is maybe a bizarre question, but it might, I guess it's how we define anxiety, but one of the questions that I had was, do you see anxiety as sin? And maybe there's different layers of anxiety, but we'll just leave that open-ended question.
Yeah, so I am not a mental health professional, and I lean more toward the depression side than the anxiety side, although I have within the last 6 or 8 months started to show some of the anxiety side of things. There's a difference in my thinking between worry, which we're told not to do, and anxiety, which frequently, as a mental illness, we have no control over anyway. Scott, my co-host on the podcast, he does deal with anxiety very severely, and he tried to describe it to me one time, and I think he did this on the podcast too. As a parent, he says, can you imagine what it feels like when you're walking through the mall and then all of a sudden you turn around and you realize your child isn't with you. They were just with you a second ago, and now they're not there. And all of the feelings that instantly rush all over you at that moment. He said, try feeling that for an hour, an hour and a half, 2 hours, a whole afternoon of just this dread, this sense of fear that washes over you that you have no control over. And worry is a choice. This is, again, my thinking. Worry is a choice, and we're told not to do that. Anxiety, just like depression, is not something we choose, but it is something that needs to be managed.
Yeah, and I think of the Matthew 6, don't worry about tomorrow, and then I even think of Paul in Philippians, do not be anxious about everything, but everything by prayer. And I think you're right. There's multi-layers of that, and I can totally agree with that. Let's go back to helping the congregation. Since and I don't know how many ministers you've met. It just seems, and even I myself have had it. I haven't had it in the last couple of years, but what can the church do to help prevent anxiety and keep the minister from going crazy? Now, people might be thinking we're speaking evil of the church here, but this is just a reality that many do. You don't know how many ministers I've met that went to the hospital thinking they're having a heart attack, and they realized it was just a panic attack because they were just so burnt out, so I guess burning the candle at both ends. They'd allowed an environment in their lives to kind of overtake them, and they just ended up in this state of anxiety. What advice can you give to the church, if anyone's in the church that's listening here?
Yeah, I would encourage, speaking to church leadership, and that's the position that I always take on our podcast. Scott speaks from a layperson's perspective, and I speak from church leadership perspective. The one thing I do know is that people don't know what our job, our calling entails until you actually do it. It strikes me that as caring, as compassionate, as loving, as encouraging as my church council, my elders are, at the end of the day, they don't understand what I do and can't. And so what they do instead is they admit, I don't know what you're going through, but what can I do to help? And so it's that care. The church, if the church can care for the people that are caring, and help kind of refill that bucket of that we minister out of.
Mm-hmm.
If you can be aware of that, make sure your minister's taking their day off. Give them their day off. Don't schedule a meeting because you know they're going to be around anyway on Monday. Make sure they take their holidays. Demand it, in fact. I'm aware of a pastor who, for 4 years, didn't take holidays and ended up just completely flaming out at the end of those 4 years. The church has to take some responsibility for that too. Yes, he needed to manage himself better, but church leadership needed to say, this is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say care for your pastor. Provide opportunities for the pastor to self-care. Make sure there are boundaries in place. So, I mean, you can't be on call 24/7 even though you're on call 24/7, if you follow me.
Mm-hmm.
There have to be those boundaries. There have to be those times where you're blessed to disappear for a week or 2 days or 3 days or whatever, and church leadership not only expects it but demands it.
Yeah, that's a good point about. I remember I was involved in leadership in a church, years before I became a full-time pastor, and the minister that I was involved with wasn't taking vacations, and I just flat out, or any vacation at all, any days off.
No.
And I said to him, if you don't, I'm going to put in a request to the church that they don't pay you until you start taking the days off. And
yes.
And so, yeah, I totally agree. And, I've heard the stories, too, ministers just constantly not taking that time. And I don't know how you can minister effectively if you're not taking care of yourself, ministering to your family. That's some great advice.
If it's not your mind that breaks down, your body will, for sure.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. And I know we're kind of going off what I had told you, but do you just exercise, and I know that maybe people, I guess my channel is usually more spiritual, but what role does physical exercise, something is so, I guess, what people would consider worldly, but what role does physical exercise play in you keeping healthy in mind and body? So
I've taken up a regimen of running. And I try, and it's been a cold. I know I'm talking to somebody from Dryden, but it's been cold this winter, and so I haven't done as good a job as I would have liked to do. But I took up running. That's been really helpful. Just the natural wellness that comes from just being active and getting your body working the way God designed it to work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not coincidental that Paul uses so much imagery about athleticism and running races and athletes beating their bodies into shape. I think so much of that, if you're not physically well, it's going to seep over into your emotional wellness, and that's going to seep over into your spiritual wellness. It's all connected. Mm-hmm. And so it plays a big part. And I'm actually thankful because my wife has recently taken up running, and so we can challenge and encourage each other that way.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've been exercising regularly for years, and then I had to go on a dietary change, but it's amazing how well you feel when you're actually eating healthy. And it's maybe weird to hear this on a Christian discussion, but these are just common sense things. Eating healthy and exercising is actually good for your mental well-being.
It is. It is.
Yeah, big time. Okay, I have one more question, then I have another question I want to talk about panic attacks.
Sure.
So you often hear in the Christian community, in the more radical, maybe fundamentalist or charismatic, that certain types of mental illnesses are satanic. I wonder if you wanted to address that at all. Or maybe that it's left you speechless.
I'm just trying to frame it. What I want to say is that and this is what I said earlier about sickness can cause you to sin. And I think when you're not thinking straight, when you're susceptible to all kinds of mixed up, jumbled thoughts and thought patterns, I have no doubt whatsoever that Satan will use that, and will use that as a foothold, as a hole to creep in and to attack you. Do I think that the mental illness that I have, for instance, speaking firsthand, no, I don't think it's satanic. But do I think that Satan has made the best of it because of my poor behaviors, because I wasn't thinking straight? Yeah, I do believe that. So can the demonic realm benefit from mental illness? Yeah, I believe that. Can they cause it? I don't have any firsthand experience with that. Mental illness and demon possession, are two completely different topics in my thinking.
Yeah, demon possession, that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a different discussion we need to have at a different time. I've been meeting some people, in context of ministry, that are afraid to leave the house because they're afraid they're going to have a panic attack. And it's that fight to flight thing, and I'm sure you're familiar with it because you've been doing the podcast. But it's mental illness is sometimes just a bizarre thing. You're afraid to leave the house because you're afraid of getting the panic attack, and that's the thing that gives you the panic attack.
Yeah.
Fear of it. And, maybe you didn't know this, but I had a panic attack in the pulpit once, years ago. And it was that fear of having it again that kept the panic attack, the anxiety really bubbling up. Until I actually, believe it or not, I watched a YouTube clip of a guy that was saying you need to talk to and this seemed weird, and it wasn't New Ageist. You just need to tell your body that whatever it's going through, it's okay. And just if you have a panic attack, you just got to realize it's okay. And you can just let it go, and just embrace it, and don't fear it anymore. And once I started doing that, I quit having them.
Yeah, I as I said earlier, I started in the last year or so to lean toward an anxiety side of things, and it was happening to me on Saturday nights. I would give anything for Sunday morning not to come. And it wasn't paralyzing, but it would ruin an entire evening because I would just have this sense of dread that Sunday's going to come and whatever I imagined was going to happen. And then I would wake up Sunday morning ready to go, no problem at all. And so in that time, what I started to do, so I'm really glad that you said this because it's what I did and it worked, and that is self-talk. And it's not a I am one with myself, new agey kind of thing. It's just simply speaking a message to myself that I could hear that you're going to be fine. It's going to be okay. You have nothing to worry about. It doesn't all rest on you. God has got this one. And it's more of a self-reminder of things you already know. And I found that to be very effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I did it too, it always start with, Lord, thank you that you're sovereign. You're over all these things. You're a sovereign and gracious God. And it wasn't like I was, becoming one with myself either. It was just that constant, again, preaching, it's a discipline that we should all do, preaching to ourselves and reminding ourselves of the grace of God and His providence, and then, reminding ourselves that, if, let's say we do have a panic attack in the service, it's not the end of the world. And I can embrace that, and then for some reason, then the anxiety dies down. It's interesting that your body thinks very bizarre, that, no, you fear, and then you keep going, and then you spin out, and then you're in a full-blown panic attack.
Yeah.
But I found that technique very helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that because it feels weird. Self-talk feels weird. If you walk down the street doing self-talk, people look at you funny.
Yeah, sure are.
But it's what worked for me, and does continue to work for me when those times come. I don't think I have experienced a full-blown panic attack the way you're describing, but it was more of that growing anxiety that everything's going to fall apart tomorrow at church or whatever, and it never does and never did.
Yeah, exactly. Anywho, that we'll leave it at that, and hopefully you'll come back and talk to me. But again, I wanted to remind everybody to check out Deane Proctor's podcast with Scott Martin, Mind Matters. You can find it on iTunes. As well, go and check out, it's queensway.org.
That's right.
Queensway.org. Here's some of Deane's preaching. It'll be well worth your time. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Revhillmanhawk. You can and don't forget to comment whether you want to troll me or compliment how great Deane is, or like me or dislike the video. So thanks for watching. God bless you all.